Hello, everyone, and welcome to Drisha. This is our Falzmat, and I'd like to welcome you all to the first session of The Moral Philosophy of Rabbi Isaac Hutner with Rabbi Alex Ozar, who we're very happy to have back here teaching. Does Jewish tradition recognize an ethic independent of halakha? For Rav Hutner, a leading mid-20th century rosh yeshiva, the question is a poorly formed one. The proper question is not whether, as faithful halakhic Jews, we are bound by moral obligations, obviously we are, and it is not the question of what the relationship between morality is. The real question, rather, is what the relationship should be, how we ought to interweave our moral and religious aspirations. This course will explore Rav Hutner's ambitious moral religious philosophy through close reading of selections from his magnum opus, the Pahad Yitzhak. And we're glad to have Rabbi Alex Ozar back here. He is, when not teaching at Drisha, the rabbi and co-director of the OU-JLIC at Yale. He is also recently completed his PhD in philosophy, and he has written for several publications, including but not limited to Harvard Theological Review, Dean Israel, The House, Tradition, Torah Umada, and more. There is a source sheet. It was sent out earlier today, but I'm also going to post it in chat once things get underway. And with that, I'd like to hand over the mic to Rabbi Ozar for the evening.
Thank you so much, Kayla. And thank you to Drisha for hosting, as always. And thank you to all of you for being here. I'm really excited to get to do this with all of you. I'm going to attempt. Rav Hutner is confoundingly difficult to study and to teach. And I'll talk a little bit about why and try to bring you in to get a textured sense of why, and also what value that provides. Precisely the fact that it's so difficult. But I want to try to, by way of introduction, give a sense of what it is we're dealing with, how I came to this, and what this particular series is about. I think there are a million ways, a million angles we could take on Rav Hutner, a million things we can try to do with the study of Rav Hutner, and a million journeys we could go on, or destinations we could set ourselves toward. I've chosen the one strand we have about 3 hours together, Rav Hutner as moral philosopher, or the moral philosophy of Rav Hutner. I think if you ask people in general, you went up to somebody in the street and you said, "Hey, I have a question for you. On one foot, what is Rav Hutner's Pahad Yitzhak about?" I'll talk a little bit about what the Pahad Yitzhak is in a second. What is Rav Hutner's abiding fixation? What are the major themes in Rav Hutner? I don't think most people would say moral philosophy. Say the worship of God, the study of Torah, the focus on inwardness and interiority, spirituality in the study of the law, maybe even authenticity and creativity in the religious life. I want to make the argument that to understand what Rav Hutner's project is really about, what he's after, what makes him tick, what he's trying to do, we need to latch on to discern the role that moral philosophy is playing in his work. So just to give a very quick overview to who this person is. Rav Hutner is born early 20th century, I think 1905. If somebody has Google handy, you can make sure I got that right. He's born in Warsaw. He spends his early years he's taught at home, various tutors. We don't know exactly what the arrangements were. As a teenager, he winds up studying in one of the major yeshivot in Europe at the time, in Slobodka. It's a Musar yeshiva, led by Rabbi Finkel, the alter of Slobodka, a fascinating, charismatic figure in his own right, and somebody who, whereas like other versions of the Musar movement, which was focused on not just the traditional study of the law, but on character and moral refinement, whereas certain strands of the Musar movement had a extremely severe approach to the human person and to character and to discipline. The the altar of Slobodka's approach was focused on, and the slogan, Gadlut Adam, the greatness of the individual human person, and cultivating a sense of agency, of autonomy, of creativity, that we should stand tall and proud in living out our lives as the individuals that we are. There's a cultivation of individuality, a cultivation of a kind of self-assurance through discipline and hard work and accountability. It's an intensive environment. Hutner has a complicated relationship with the altar, not adversarial, but complicated. And he's clearly, as a very young person, he goes and he's younger than most of the people there. He's trying to find himself. And from an early age, Hutner has an extremely expansive sense of self and expansive set of intellectual and spiritual horizons. He's trying to make sense of the world, and he's not the kind of person who is capable of accepting clear and one-sided univocal answers to his big questions. It was always going to be complicated and always going to be fundamentally open-ended. And that's going to be one of our main themes for today. He winds up studying at the Slobodka branch in Israel, and this is in mandatory Palestine. He develops a relationship with Rav Kook, who's a charismatic mystical figure, becomes one of the leading figures in what comes to be known as religious Zionism. Rav Hutner later has to downplay his affiliation with Rav Kook for political reasons. We'll touch on that a little bit too. He winds up coming to the United States, in which we have in his letters, he describes in terms of a sense of, whereas where he'd grown up in Europe and the yeshiva structures there, it was all highly established and highly rigorous with fixed sets of standards for conduct and for thought. You could push back a little bit, or you could try to do, hide secular literature under your mattress or something. But fundamentally, all of the expectations were highly rigorous and fixed. And there was just also a rigorously fixed set of just possibilities for what he could do and become. And he comes to the United States and he has this sense of open-ended possibility, sort of like an earlier generation of American pioneers going out west, just these vast expanses of land and this sense that we can make something new, we can do new things here. And he comes to the United States and there are only like fledgling yeshivot, Orthodox Judaism and serious yeshiva study barely existed in the United States in the mid-20th century. When he comes, Rav Aaron Cutler is around and it's getting what becomes Lakewood Yeshiva started. He winds up leading, it's a complicated story how he winds up there, but he winds up leading the yeshiva called Chaim Berlin in Brooklyn. He's there for many years, and it comes to be known as just one of the great luminaries of the yeshiva world in the United States and around the world. And he is both a brilliant traditional Talmud scholar, as any head of yeshiva would have to be, and just in a purely just classical way. He is a master of the Talmud, and that's what he spends his time teaching his students. He's also a charismatic figure and a charismatic educator, and somebody who has a very powerful spiritual existential relationship with his students. He has extremely high expectations of them. They treat him with extreme reverence, a kind of reverence that we might find in 2025 to be odd or off-putting or even disturbing. But it was essential to him, because to him, Torah study couldn't just be intellectual. It wasn't just about ideas. It had to be grounded in an actual relationship with an actual master, who could shape who you were going to be as a student. And who I'm going to become as a student, is not just about what I can learn, what I can memorize, the brilliant insights I can churn out, but the relationship I'm going to have with the great authority, the master, and how I'm going to develop myself in relationship to them. And so he takes on certain trappings of the Hasidic Rabbi. He winds up dressing somewhat like a Hasidic Rabbi, and students would have to knock on his door gently, and he would buzz them in to come in, and then they would have to, instead of turning around to walk out his office door, they would have to back out while still facing him, this like extreme reverence. He publishes almost nothing early in his life in traditional literature. Early in his life, when he's getting started out his career, he publishes a compendium of legal scholarship, technical legal scholarship, on an obscure part of the Talmud. He does this to sort of establish his credentials as a great rabbi and as a scholar and somebody who you'd want to hire to run your yeshiva. And so he puts that out there under his own name to make a name for himself. He publishes a handful of other things, some of them a little quirky and idiosyncratic, under pseudonyms. Sort of like academic commentary on an obscure piece of rabbinic literature, which is not the sort of thing that a traditional rosh yeshiva would publish. He publishes that anonymously. He did some translations of some like early proto-Zionist literature. Also not the sort of thing a traditionalist rosh yeshiva should be doing. And so that's published anonymously, not quite under his own name. And this becomes a theme for him. He is, for very good reason, he's a smart man. He wants to be successful. He wants to have a career. And he wants to have a career in the traditionalist, right-wing, Orthodox world. In order to do that, there is, again, a very fixed set of standards and expectations. They're very clear and rigorous. And if you insinuate the wrong thing, if you don't dress the right way, if you don't, or if you say things that just make people worry that you're not exactly coming from the right place, you don't relate to the right sources of authority in the right ways, then you are not fit for leadership. And so he's extremely careful. And yet, as I said, this is a man with an extraordinarily expansive intellectual and spiritual mindset, and just someone who is always asking questions, always looking to learn, never satisfied with what he's received. And so this leaves him in a complicated place because externally, it has to look like he's playing the game by the rules, and internally, he's going to be working through these incredibly difficult questions in complicated, original, and creative ways. The one thing he publishes in the prime of his life, and what becomes his magnum opus, this is what he's known for, is a collection called the Pahad Yitzhak. So this is they were originally delivered as extended sermons, 2-3 hour, I'm not sure what the exact English word, they're called ma'amarim, the expositions in a charismatic, ecstatic mode. There would be singing. They're done on holidays. So we have ones from Shavuot, Pesach, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. So it's a sacred atmosphere. He has all of his close students there. It's framed by song in the Hasidic mold. And everyone has come to drink in the words of the great master. And he would hold forth. They are a fascinating combination of rigorous Talmudic style legal scholarship in form. So they're tightly argued with like clear logical connectives. Everything is like well elaborated and just dialectically rigorous in a way that, say, Hasidic writing is not, whereas Hasidic writing is often highly associative and flowing and fluid. It's often hard to tell how you got from one paragraph to the next. With Hutner, it's clear and systematic. But whereas someone in his role and with his profile would normally publish their insights on the Talmud, on the legal sections of the Talmud, Rav Hutner was focused on what he called the chovot halavavot, the obligations of the heart, on matters of the mind, what we're supposed to believe, and what we're supposed to feel, and how we're supposed to be in relationship to God, called machshava, Jewish thought, philosophy, theology. And so he is. We have from people in the Musar, other figures in the Musar school, you'll get transcriptions of what we would call sermons or divrei Torah. They would give, or a shmooze. They would give a 30-minute talk, and the students would transcribe them. There'd be some interesting allusions, and they would, exhort their students to do this or that. But we don't have anything. The Pahad Yitzhak really is unique in being like this highly developed, rigorous exploration and exposition of these philosophical and theological ideas in this fully traditionalist mode. And so the first question, there are going to be two interrelated questions here. The first to ask is, what is this project? What is he doing? And this traditionalist rosh yeshiva, who's supposed to just be teaching Talmud, supposed to just be doing the law, supposed to be known for that, puts out very carefully, he's very careful about how he publishes it, puts out his one major contribution to the world is the Pahad Yitzhak, this series of philosophical, theological expositions in this charismatic sacred mode. What's it about? What's he after? And what I'm going to argue is that one of the major things he is trying to do is to figure out, to discern what he precisely as a traditionalist Jew and a traditionalist rabbi, what he owes to the people around him, what it means to be truly, fully responsible to and for the people around him. That's question one, or direction one. From the other side, maybe I should have started here. I want to talk about what I'm doing here, or what I'm trying to do, and what I'm inviting you all to do with me. We all find ourselves in a world, and there are people around us. Those people make claims on us. There's nothing we're more certain of. There's nothing I'm more certain of than the people around me, my family, the people close to me, the community around me, the political community around me, the nation. There's nothing I know with more certainty than that they make claims on me, that I need to adjust my conduct. I need to provide care for them. I need to show respect to them. I need to give them what I owe them. And I owe them something very real and powerful. And also, I have no idea how to do that. It's wildly confusing, all the time. How am I supposed to balance? I have 3 children. Thank God they're all in bed. I did not realize when I registered to give this class that my wife would be out of town today. I managed to get everyone to bed just before this, but I've got 3 kids. They're all screaming and need different things. Even just in that frame, how am I supposed to know who I'm supposed to give what to and how? And then I can ask questions that I should be asking. Am I doing enough? Am I doing it the right way? And then how do I go about answering the question? Am I doing enough? Am I doing it the right way? What else should I be doing? And that's just in my little nuclear cute family here. You start iterating that out into more complex frames. What am I supposed to, my community has this or that problem or challenge or thing it's trying to figure out. There are various pressures on me to show up and do different things. And how am I supposed to do that? And how am I supposed to figure out what I'm supposed to do next and whether I'm doing enough and whether it's right. And then politically, we as human beings, we're naturally political. We form ourselves into political communities. And this comes with extraordinary opportunities to care for each other and to provide for each other and to make sure we're all safe and have what we need in order to flourish, and comes with all kinds of problems. And we wind up fighting wars. And even when we're not literally killing each other, we're causing each other immense pain and harm. And we all know we need to do better. But knowing how we're supposed to do better and how each of us as individuals is supposed to contribute to doing better is remarkably difficult. And then as religious people, we have this sense, this conviction that the answers to these questions is going to come in large part from the Torah and from the law we've been given, the set of instructions for how we're supposed to lead our lives. And this ought to tell us, give us guidance to how we're supposed to put the next foot forward. But we don't just have the Torah. We also have a sense of just, we call it a moral sense, intuition. We have basic human decency. We know there's certain things that are right and wrong, certain things we are supposed to do. And religious thinkers, philosophers, will often pose these two spheres of instruction. There's morality and religion, and sometimes they may conflict, and you can worry about the conflicts and worry about how you'd sort that out. Sometimes, even when there's no conflict, you can ask philosophical questions about how these things are supposed to relate to each other, and you can try to give theories as to how they can be properly interwoven. And Rav Hutner is going to argue that to ask the question, what is the relationship between halakha, the law, Torah, and our natural morality as human beings, basic human decency, and to try to put forward a theory as to how they are related is a fundamental mistake, and it's a missed opportunity. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that. The last thing I'm going to say by way of, before we dive into the text that I have for tonight. Human beings, there are many ways to think about what we call morality or normativity, or what it is we're supposed to do. Human beings, Westerners and Jews, in no particular order, tend to think in terms of rules. We imagine, or we know, we feel that there is a body of rules as if there were a manual, and you could write down, do this, don't do that, do this. Is the image of the tablets of the law. You have this in the religious frame, and you have it in secular frames. What it means to be moral is to do all the things you're supposed to do, and not do all the things you're not supposed to do. There's a universal and binding and categorical set of rules governing our lives, and to be a good person is to be in full compliance with that set of rules. And then, on the other hand, you have let's say the existentialist view. The paragon of this is Jean-Paul Sartre. The existentialist view that no rule, and it doesn't have to be the existentialist way, I'm calling it that. No body of rules will ever be sufficient to spell out what it is that we owe each other, or what we're supposed to do. It's never even going to come close to capturing the depth and poignancy of what it means, even just to show up for another human being in front of you and to make sense of what you owe them. It will certainly never be sufficient in hard cases where we have conflicts. Do I help this person? Do I help that person? There's no rule for that. And to think that there are rules is going to be a mistake. And you're going to miss what really matters if you fall prey to abstractions. And there's this tug of war going on in the history of moral philosophy between people saying, no, we need clear and rigorous rules for action that apply universally and categorically. And people who are saying, no, morality is fundamentally particular, and it requires that you, the individual, look to the situation, to the people concretely in front of you, discern what is called for, and decide on your own. It's not what somebody else tells you, and it's not just some rule out there. You need to figure out, as a function of your own soul and the concrete needs in front of you, what it is you are going to choose to do. And again, what I'm going to say for Rav Hutner is that this is a bad dichotomy. That if you're thinking that you have to choose between these two, you've gone down the wrong path. And ultimately, with both of these sets of dichotomies, there's the question of religion versus just natural human morality, and there's the question of a law-based morality and a personal, more fluid existentialist morality. In both cases, Rav Hutner is going to claim that what it means for us to be good people, what it means for us to be moral people, what it means for us to be religious people, what it means for us to give others what we truly owe them and to show up in the world in the right way, is going to come through the dynamic interweaving of both poles. We're going to try to hold them, not just hold on to both, but we're going to try to ensure that proactively work towards their progressive interpenetration. I'm going to pause very briefly. That went a little bit longer than I meant to. Any questions, reflections on that, and then we'll dive into the text I had. I know I said a lot of things. Sarah.
This may come up later or not at all, so I guess I'd ask it now. I've always kind of wondered this. So you mentioned like, okay, this is not what a traditional rosh yeshiva Talmud scholar is supposed to be writing about at the time that he wrote it. Did this open opportunities for other people in the yeshiva world to think and write in this way, or did he kind of stand alone going forward also?
It's a really interesting question. I actually think there is a literature that sort of like mimics what Rav Hutner does to a certain extent, which I think is generally not particularly interesting, because I find it flat in a way that Rav Hutner is not. Yeah, I don't feel qualified to answer the question. You know, like I think there certainly are attempts. There's some more systematic exploration of these kinds of themes. I don't think there's anything quite like it that I'm aware of.
Okay.
So now with the depth of rigor and what it sees the genuine focus on human and moral questions and not just theological questions. Thank you. Okay, so very briefly, so again, I want to make this case that there's so much going on in Rav Hutner, and there really is so much going on in Rav Hutner. But I do want to make this convince you, to the extent you need convincing, that part of what animates, or a major part of what animates Rav Hutner, an essential part of what animates Rav Hutner, is the question of what we owe to each other, of morality, and how to make sense of that, how to figure it out, and how to move forward as human beings. The way I see this, the way I want to make this case, is that throughout his writing, and again, his writing is very hard. It's very hard to make systematic claims, because it's all highly enigmatic and elliptical and tightly woven. So even just within an individual essay, it's not like there's a thesis and then a few paragraphs of argument and then a conclusion. There's usually like he asks one question and then there's a line of argument and he asks another question and there's another line of argument and then it all is interwoven and then a few pages later you get the conclusion and then you're like, wait, actually I totally forgot about what the beginning was. It's very hard to trace, even within an individual piece, exactly what it is he's after. You can do it, which is why it's so fun and exciting, to sink in and unravel the knot. Like, what is he actually after here? And then from piece to piece, it's not like his books are not systematic treatises. Each piece stands on its own. And so you really have to go through each one closely, methodically, and ask, what are the themes? What are the questions? What's he after? In my reading, I've gone through all of it at this point. One thing he comes back to over and over and over again, in various ways, and again, very little of it is systematic, at least not in presentation. Something he constantly comes back to is an attempt on his part to do what I'll call expanding the palette of normativity. So we can think of the normative, which some people use the term to mean normal. I'm using it to mean when I am found myself bound by some kind of ought. There's something I should do. So you can think of normativity in many ways. So there are just rules to which I'm bound. We call them norms, just things I'm supposed to do. We have like etiquette, mores. Why do you put the fork on one side of it goes on the right and on the left side of the plate? I would know how to do it instinctively. Put the fork on the left side of the plate. Why do you do that? And when you're standing, setting the table, you're supposed to, I should put the fork on the left. That's not because anybody commanded me to do it. It might be. I remember my soft always being very insistent on it, but it's just like we ask why am I doing it? Why do any of us do it? Nobody could really tell you. It's just we just have this rule. It's just it's there in the air, and we're bound by it. And it's fundamentally impersonal. You have rules of games. I'm playing tennis, and so I'm supposed to serve the ball at this point. I'm supposed to hit it back at that point. If it goes over there, I'm supposed to count it that way, and this or that. That's another kind of normativity. And then you have like I mentioned my children. I have a relationship with my children. I owe them certain things. So again, there's certain impersonal, abstract things that I'm supposed to do for them. Everyone knows I'm supposed to provide them with food and shelter. But there's a whole infinity of other things that I owe to them, relationally. Where if I didn't provide them enough love and enough care and enough attention, they would have justified resentment against me. And the reason I want to do it is the reason I want to care for them is not just because there's some rule that says, well, you need to sit down and read books with your kids for X amount of time per day, but it's that I love them and I care about them and we're in this relationship together and they look to me with a certain set of needs and expectations and I'm looking to them with a certain amount of love and care I'm trying to give. And through that complex negotiation, we figure out, well, I wind up reading books to them for a certain amount of time during the day. That's a different kind of normativity. Rav Hutner is, and then you can also ask, there's legal normativity. There's like, well, there's certain things you just shouldn't do. And then there's certain things that you shouldn't do with the force of law and sanctions. And then even within that, there's jaywalking and there's misdemeanors and felonies and there are different kinds. And then there's religious law, which sometimes come with certain kinds of sanction or threatened sanction like hell or other kinds of corporeal punishments. If you have terrestrial authorities who can do that. And then you might think also just there's a quality of fulfilling an imperative in relationship to a God, which has some kind of quality to it that other forms of normativity don't. Rav Hutner, throughout his work, we're not going to get to all the material I want to do, which is fine because we have 3 sessions. Rav Hutner, throughout his work, is trying to push because Judaism is a religion of law. Traditionalist Judaism is a religion of law. Halakha is central. It's central to what Rav Hutner does every day. It shapes who he is, shapes the society he lives in, shapes the community he is responsible to and for. And it just is his primary focus. He is bound by this incredibly rigorous, detailed set of laws, and that is obviously going to be central to his worldview and his understanding of what he's supposed to be doing. And it is clear as day to Rav Hutner that cannot be the entirety of the normative universe. It can't just be law. I'm going to give you a few examples of where he articulates this in different ways. So just offhand, without even going into the text, he says appeals in numerous places. I can't give you the citations here. I have them elsewhere. To rabbinic sayings, which differentiate clearly between Kabbalat's Malchut Shemayim, the acceptance of the kingdom of God, the sovereignty of God, of heaven, and Kabbalat Mitzvot, the acceptance of the commandments themselves. And there's another early rabbinic source he quotes a distinction between, it says that Kiblu Malchutai is first you accept my kingship, God says to the people, and after that, Kiblu Gezeratai, you accept my commandments. And what Hutner says is, look, you see that in addition to the law, the commandments, which again are central, and he's not going to compromise on that. But he says if you just focus on the commandments, you miss the sovereignty aspect. There's a king to whom we are in relation, and to whom we the obligation to fulfill the law is in relation to this sovereign God. And we need to hold on to that if we're going to fulfill our mandate as Jews. In the beginning of his essays on Hanukkah is a really interesting discussion about the prohibition the Talmud has to put in writing the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral law. So there's the written law of Scripture, and then on the rabbinic conception, in addition to the written law, which we have as a fixed text, there's a body of teachings, modes of interpretation and exposition and analysis, which are given also by God to Moses at Sinai, which are then passed on. And obviously you can write down the written Torah. That's the whole point. It's a fixed text. There's a prohibition on writing down the oral Torah. This prohibition is subsequently violated, and the Talmud says that it frames this as a violation of the divine mandate on account of necessity, because human beings and Jews eventually in the course of history were unable to maintain full fidelity to the oral law, and were unable to just effectively transmit it without putting some of it to writing. But this was a sort of transgression of its character, and the Talmud attributes what's the basis of this idea that we're not supposed to write down the oral law and subvert its character? Says, again, grounded in Talmudic tradition, that is not itself another law. It would be a mistake to see that as, well, there are all the laws, and then there's also a law that says that you shouldn't write down the oral law about the laws. He says, no. This is not another law. Rather, it's a function of brit. It's a function of our covenant. That we saw earlier, we need to focus on not just the law, but on the sovereignty of God. And now he's saying we need to focus on our relationship with God and the mutual reciprocal commitment we've made to God with the law as its object. So he says the formulation. It says the writing of the prohibition on writing of the Torah of the oral law, eino isur prati. It's not an individual prohibition. Bein shar isur ureha shel Torah. It's not one among all of the other injunctions in the Torah. Ela shehi kviyu tatsura shel kritut brito shel Hakadosh Baruch Hu im Yisrael. Rather, it is the fixing of the form of the establishment of the covenant between God and Israel. So you think about, if let's say you have a romantic relationship, and you may have come to certain agreements instead of commitments, like I take out the garbage on Monday nights, which I took care of today, and I will put the kids to bed these nights, and there's certain just commitments you've made. They're clear, they're laid out, and you don't have to renegotiate them every time. That's vital. Any relationship is going to need that. But then also, like, there are those things where it's not about the letter of the law, and you would be completely missing the point if it's about the letter of the law, like how you treat each other on your anniversary, right? That like there couldn't be a manual for that. You have a certain kind of range of expectations. But fundamentally, it's not what did you do, but it's how did you do it, and how did I feel when you did it, and what was the quality of relationship that you were both expressing and constituting in doing what you did for our anniversary. And this opens up vistas of opportunity. There are things you can express, there are things you can create that you can't when it's just a matter of either complying with the law or not, of either taking out the garbage or not. And there are also opportunities for causing harm in much more fluid, dynamic ways than there aren't when it's just a matter of did you put the garbage out or not. So he actually goes on to say that even though there's a prohibition on writing down the oral law, And even though that prohibition is violated, we wind up writing down the Mishnah, and we wind up writing down the Talmud. He says the Mishnah has these really interesting characteristics. Mishnah is this early body of rabbinic teachings, and he says, puts forward the claim that the Mishnah retains various oral characteristics. And actually, we know this, that the Mishnah was originally orally, mimetically transmitted. So there was a fixed text, but it was memorized and taught that way, transmitted that way. And he says there are various features of the text which reflect its oral character. Just the ways it's, various features. And he says, like, why would it be, once we're making this compromise, and once we're saying, look, we can't carry on with keeping this purely oral. We have to commit it to writing, and we have to bite the bullet on this transgression. He says, once you're biting the bullet, why don't you just bite it? And like, why are you trying to maintain the oral character in these like half-hearted ways? And he says, if this were just a specific injunction among all the other injunctions of the Torah, so then it would make no sense to have partial fulfillment. If it's a matter of fulfilling or transgressing the law, look, you either fulfill it or you don't. There's none of this like halfway stuff. Like I either take out the garbage or I don't. But he says, since he goes on to say, like, since this is not just a prohibition among the other, just an injunction among the other injunctions, since this is about our relationship, it's about expressing and constituting our relationship with God. So there, if something happens and for some reason it is impossible for you to execute the full romantic plan you had on your anniversary, that doesn't mean you just thank you, Paul. It doesn't mean you just let it go. You still have the opportunity, and because you have the opportunity, you have the imperative of doing something. So if you can't be there, for some reason you get stuck and you can't be there, you make the phone call. You don't just say, I make a phone call. If you can't get the full gift you meant to give you get the smaller gift, and you still find some way to express that even though you couldn't realize the fullness of the vision and the fullness of the imperative that you were under, you still love the person. And so here, like, even though we cannot maintain the oral law in its orality as we're supposed to, because maintaining the orality is about our relationship with God, we find some way to express to Hashem that we still care about this. It still matters, and therefore our relationship is still alive. And he then goes on to say that this is true. This shows up in another way, a more poignant way. The obligation of martyrdom. So in general, when it comes to the obligation to give one's life to uphold Jewish law, it is generally the case we are not obligated to do that. If someone says, violate the Shabbat or I'll kill you, you violate Shabbat. There are certain carve-outs, idolatry and adultery we don't do. But most things are fine, except, the Talmud says, in a time of religious persecution, where there is another nation or some governing body that is attempting to not only to get me to transgress this or that law, but they're trying to get me to become an apostate, or they're trying to get the community to apostatize. They're trying to subvert our entire relationship with God and our standing as the Jewish people. In that case, when it's a matter of shmat, of communal oppression, and an attempt to subvert the covenant between the people of Israel and Hashem overall, in that case, the Talmud says, even if they just want you to change your shoelace, apparently Jews used to have distinctive shoelaces. If they want you, the Romans tell you they want you to wear this other kind of Roman shoelace, you have to give up your life for that. And Hutner asks, like, that's, everybody asks, why? Well, that's crazy. Why do you have to give up your life over a shoelace? It seems so insignificant. And here, again, it says, because it's not about this or that law. Here, what's implicated is the relationship itself, the covenant between us and God. And because it's not about this or that law, but it's about the essence of the relationship, then again, on the one hand, there could be more fluidity and permissiveness sometimes. There can be some latitude that you get in a real relationship where your partner understands that, you know, they're not going to hold you to every single rule. There's going to be some love and mercy and compassion. But then there will be other times in other contexts where the imperatives will be all the more extreme. Because, as he says, there isn't just, you couldn't give some definition or measure or metric to how you're supposed to express our relationship with God and what that commitment is. It's fundamentally infinite and fundamentally open-ended. And where the relationship itself is challenged, it will apply even if the object is just the laces on our shoes. And so what we've shown here in just this one example is Rav Hutner's attempts to explore and expand our normative universe. We start thinking that what it means to be moral, or what it means to be religious, what our obligations are, is fundamentally about a set of rules. And this, again, I mentioned this offhand earlier. We have this in a very powerful and concrete and clear way in the halakha, where we've got like books and books and books of rules. Elizabeth Anscombe, was a mid-20th century moral philosopher, wrote a seminal paper called Modern Moral Philosophy, lived in the 70s. Made the argument that this has spread throughout all of Western moral thinking. People think of morality in terms of a set of rules. And she says the reason they do this is because of their Jewish and Christian heritage. And maybe next time we'll talk a little bit more about the underlying spiritual import of that. Rav Hutner is saying, look, yes, those rules are real. That is a major part of what it means to be moral, what it means to be a serious person in general. And not only is it not all of it, it's not the most fundamental layer. The most fundamental layer, at least here in the religious context, is not the rules. It's not the mitzvot. It's not the Torah. The most fundamental element is our relationship with Hashem, and that has normative implications. There are obligations that come from that which cannot be spelled out in law. Not just aren't spelled out in law, but could not be spelled out in law. And that, again, comes with sometimes with some latitude on one end. You know, we had to write down the Torah, so we did. And then also can come with a heavier degree of responsibility. We only have a few minutes left, so I'm gonna just finish out with a couple other quick examples. He in his work on Rosh Hashanah in Ma'amar Tetvav, the 15th essay, he is discussing the imperative of truthfulness. And he points to a really interesting discussion about the implications of writing down an oath. So if I take an oath and I say, I'm not actually saying this, but if I said, I will, it is now forbidden for me by the life of God, it is forbidden to me to eat apples, then I can't eat apples. And people used to do this kind of thing all the time. I didn't get the formulations exactly right. People used to do this all the time. And this is why we do Kol Nidre and we do Hatar Nidarim and Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. This is a major part of ancient rabbinic culture. It says, what happens if you write it down? Instead of saying it out loud, you write it down. So there's a question. Are you bound by that if you write down the oath? But he says, and he quotes an early authority, the Rimigash, 10th century, Egypt, I believe, Spain, I think Egypt. It says, look, maybe there's a debate about this if you write down that kind of oath, where it's just between you and God. It's, I say this or that is prohibited to me, or I will do this or that. But if you make a promise to another human being, and you put it in writing. He says there is no question in that case, no question at all, that you are bound by it. And he says the reason is because when it comes to when it's taking an oath as a matter of piety or religion, so then we have rules. The rules say if you articulate the oath, you utter the oath in accordance with the proper formula, then you are bound to uphold it, and you are subject to sanction if you don't. But if I commit something to another person, I communicate to them that I'm going to do something or not do something, such that they are now reliant upon me, and I've entered into a kind of covenant with them. Says that's not the reason I'm bound by that is not a matter of law. It's not like there's this or that injunction or statute that says I need to uphold it. It's rather a function of my relationship with them. He says it's not ein shum zecher al chiyuvim v'isurim. This has nothing to do with obligations or prohibitions. This is not a statutory matter. He says rather it's from the foundations of the heart. He says He says you don't need any discussion, analysis, calculus of prohibitions or injunctions. It's not about rules. It's about the relationship. And he says, by the way, he goes on to explain what makes us bound by any of the rules of God at all? What makes us bound by the law, by the Torah, by all of those specific injunctions? It is, again, that brit, the covenant that we've made, and this reciprocal commitment that we've made with God that then leads us to be bound by the law. But he says, but that covenant cannot itself be a function of law. The law can't found the covenant which founds the law. Rather, the covenant itself, the brit between us and God, is a function of this natural, human, and divine, but just natural relational mode of commitment and responsibility and obligation. And it's only if we understand that, acknowledge it, and embrace it, and honor it, that we can begin to understand and live a truly fulfill the law in its fullness. If we don't understand that foundation, we'll miss the rest of it. The last piece, very briefly, to note is in a discussion about the respect we owe to scholars. And he quotes it's the Brisker Rav in the 20th century, in an interpretation of Maimonides, and he says there can be two aspects to this, or actually two different cases. So sometimes there's a generic impersonal norm where we must show respect and honor to scholars. And so if there's a scholar who walks by, I should stand for them. I should show them esteem. And he says that has nothing to do, I may not know the person, I may not have any relationship with that person, but it's just because I'm here. I see the object of who's implicated in this statute. The statute says if you find yourself in a situation where there is a scholar nearby, you must show them this form of respect. And because it's generic and impersonal and objective, the scholar themselves, they couldn't say, "Oh, don't worry about it," right? Because it's not about them. It's not about them at all. It's really just about the objective conditions. They are a scholar. I'm a student, so I must stand. But he says there's also an obligation that I have just to the person themselves, where if I don't show them respect, it's not just that I've done something wrong, but I've wronged them as an individual, and as this person I'm in relationship with. And because it's a personal wrong and a personal obligation, says in that case they actually could forgive it. They could say, "Alex, don't worry about it." So in his formulation, he says, in some cases, there is just a mitzvah taguf, there's just an obligation of the body of the person, the rami al kakafta de gavra, there is just an impersonal obligation that I find myself under. And there's then there's the chovat talmid l'rabo. There's the obligation, the responsibility that an actual student has to their individual, personally indexed master. And that is fundamentally different. This, I think, is one of the most important distinctions in all of moral philosophy. I've adverted this before. Again, there are impersonal things we're just supposed to do. If I ask, why shouldn't I step on Sarah Hammerling's toe? One reason is that you shouldn't step on people's toes, this impersonal, abstract obligation. Another reason is because Sarah doesn't want me to. And I know Sarah wouldn't want me to. And if I step on her toe, I'm not just doing something wrong, but I'm wronging Sarah. And this perspective, I'm going to argue in the next couple of sessions, opens up vital new vistas of what it means to be a responsible human being, and opens us up to the infinite project of trying to show up for and give to each other what we truly owe to each other as the individuals we are. In the next couple sessions, we will get to the Hutner's vision of his response to that challenge, in terms of the progressive interpenetration of the human and divine. Thank you all so much for being here. I would be delighted to be in touch with any of you at any point. Ozar@gmail.com. And I'm very much looking forward to learning with you all next week.
All right. Thank you, Rabbi Ozar. Thank you, everyone who came here today and for some learning. I just want to highlight one more upcoming class starting this week as part of Falzman. Rabbi Jonathan Ziering will be teaching how poskim come to know reality starting this Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern, and you can sign up at drisha.org/classes. I hope to see you all next week. Take care and have a good evening.